block of stone lies broken on a high, wind-scoured plain. It weighs more than a loaded delivery truck. Its edges are cut so precisely that a knife blade can barely slide into the seams where it once met another block. There is no quarry visible for kilometers, no river strong enough to carry it, no trace of the machines that, by every modern measure, should have been required to shape it. And yet, here it is. For over 400 years, people have stood in front of stones like this one and asked the same question in different languages, in different centuries, with the same disbelief in their voices. How? This is Puma Punku, and before you decide you already know the answer, you should know that the people who study it for a living still don't fully agree on one. The wind never stops here. It rolls down off the Andes at nearly 4,000 meters above sea level, thin and merciless, the kind of air that leaves modern hikers gasping within minutes. There are no forests, no visible quarries, nothing that explains at first glance why dozens of stone blocks weighing anywhere from a few tons to over 100 tons are scattered across this plateau like pieces of a shattered puzzle. When Spanish conquistadors first stumbled onto these ruins in the 16th century, they did what any curious invader would do. They asked the locals who built it. The answer should have unsettled them more than it did. Nobody knew. Not even the Inca, whose empire had absorbed this region and treated the site with something close to religious awe, could say who had raised these stones. By the time the Inca arrived, Puma Punku was already an ancient ruin, its builders long gone, their names erased from memory. So if the people who lived closest to it, generations closer than we are, couldn't explain it, what chance do we have? That's exactly the question this documentary is going to sit inside. Not with wild theories, not with easy answers, but with the actual evidence, piece by piece, block by block. Because the true story of Puma Punku, once you strip away the exaggeration, is strange enough to stand entirely on its own. To understand what happened on this plateau, you have to understand where it sits. Puma Punku isn't an isolated curiosity. It's one wing of a much larger city, Tiwanaku, built near the southern shore of Lake Titicaca. And for centuries, that city was a power the ancient world took seriously. Long before the Inca ever existed, before their roads stretched across the Andes, another civilization had already mastered this brutal landscape. Some evidence suggests people were living in this region as early as 1500 BC. But it's the period between roughly 500 and 600 AD, when Tiwanaku's monumental core, including Puma Punku, appears to have been built, that historians still argue over, because the closer they look, the less it fits their expectations. At its height, Tiwanaku may have been home to tens of thousands of people. That alone should stop you. A city of that size, at that altitude, sustained not by fertile lowland soil but by ingenuity. Farmers here built raised agricultural platforms called sukakolus, engineered to trap the sun's heat during the day and release it slowly at night, protecting crops from frost that could otherwise destroy an entire harvest in a single freezing evening. This wasn't a society scraping by. This was a civilization that had learned to outthink one of the harshest climates on the planet. Which means, when we look at Puma Punku, we're not looking at the work of desperate people guessing their way through problems. We're looking at the work of engineers. But knowing that doesn't answer the real question. It only makes it sharper. Picture the site not as it looks today, broken and scattered, but as it once stood. A stepped, terraced platform faced with massive cut stone, a wide ceremonial court at its summit, elaborately carved gateways, and something even stranger hidden in the stone itself. Precisely cut cavities, shaped like the letter I, once filled with molten metal to bind separate blocks into a single, unified structure. This wasn't decoration. This was structural engineering, the kind you'd expect from a culture with access to advanced casting and metalwork. Now think about what it actually took to get that stone here in the first place. Some of the largest blocks at Puma Punku, part of what's known as the Plataforma Litica, weigh an estimated 131 tons. That's close to the weight of a fully loaded passenger jet. The nearest source for the volcanic andesite used in the most precise blocks sits roughly 10 kilometers away. The red sandstone, some pieces even larger, may have traveled 10 to 15 kilometers from a different direction entirely, possibly ferried partway across water on reed boats, a technology still used by local communities today. No wheels built for hauling megatons, no horses, no oxen, just human beings, rope, timber, and coordination on a scale that's almost hard to picture. And this is where the story starts to feel less like archaeology and more like a mystery waiting for its next clue. Because moving the stone, as staggering as that achievement is, turns out to be only half the puzzle. The other half is what happened once the stone arrived. Look closely at the surviving blocks, and something unsettling starts to emerge. The cuts aren't rough. They're not the work of people hacking blindly at rock with crude tools. The edges run straight. The corners approach true right angles. Long, parallel grooves stretch across certain surfaces, with a consistency that looks less like handwork and more like something mechanical passed over the stone. Small drilled holes appear at intervals so regular they seem deliberately measured. For decades, this precision fueled a very tempting story. Maybe, some suggested, this simply couldn't have been done by hand. Maybe an unknown advanced civilization helped. Maybe, in the more sensational corners of the internet, something not even human was involved. It's a compelling idea. It's also not what the evidence supports, and serious researchers have spent years carefully dismantling it. Not because the stonework isn't extraordinary, it absolutely is, but because the real explanation, once you understand it, is arguably more impressive than any myth could be. Andesite, the volcanic stone used for the most precisely shaped blocks, is brutally hard, but it isn't indestructible. Andean stoneworkers had access to something almost as hard: hematite hammerstones, dense enough to gradually pound and abrade andesite into shape through thousands upon thousands of controlled strikes. Researchers have physically tested this. Using only stone hammers and abrasive sand, skilled hands can, over time, produce flat surfaces and sharp, accurate angles in volcanic rock. It's slow. It's exhausting. It requires patience most modern people can barely imagine. But it works. Here's where it gets more interesting, though. Because even accepting all of that, even accepting years of patient labor and generations of specialized skill passed down through master craftsmen, some of what survives at Puma Punku still doesn't fully add up. Certain block faces are flat enough that reflected light shows almost no distortion across the surface. Some interlocking grooves match between separate stones with a tolerance so tight that a sheet of paper can barely fit into the gap. And strangely, similar measurements and proportions appear to repeat across multiple unrelated blocks, as if the builders were working from some kind of standardized system, an ancient blueprint no one has ever found. This is exactly why Puma Punku refuses to leave the conversation among engineers who study ancient construction. Not because it proves anything supernatural, but because it exposes just how badly we've underestimated what so-called primitive tools in the right hands were actually capable of achieving. So where does that leave us? Most archaeologists agree on the broad strokes. Stone tools, abrasives, and staggering amounts of skilled human labor shaped these blocks. What remains genuinely, actively debated is how certain surfaces achieved such extreme flatness, and why measurements line up so consistently across stones that were, as far as we know, cut separately. Some researchers have proposed the existence of a standardized Tiwanaku unit of measure, a shared system of proportion built into the culture's entire architectural language. It's a compelling theory. It's still just that, a theory. But numbers and measurements can only tell you so much. To really understand Puma Punku, you have to remember something easy to forget when you're staring at a 131-ton block. Real people built this. People standing at nearly 3,800 meters above sea level, in air so thin that modern visitors need days to adjust. People who worked through frost-bitten mornings and blistering midday sun in a climate that could swing more than 20 degrees Celsius before nightfall. People who ate potatoes, quinoa, and llama meat, who wove intricate textiles dyed with crushed insects and mountain plants, who buried their dead with careful offerings, suggesting a belief in something beyond this world, and who apparently dedicated an almost unimaginable amount of communal effort, not to a palace, not to a fortress, but to a temple. That detail changes everything. Puma Punku wasn't built to defend against an army. It wasn't a marketplace or a granary. As best as archaeologists can reconstruct, it was a place of ritual, built by a society whose entire worldview revolved around agricultural cycles, celestial movement, and the veneration of ancestors and mountain spirits. Nearby structures at Tiwanaku align with solstice sunrises with a precision that suggests these builders weren't just skilled stoneworkers. They were skilled astronomers, embedding the movement of the sun directly into their architecture. So imagine it. Generations of families walking for hours across brutal terrain, hauling stone not because a whip forced them to, but because they believed in some deep and desperate way that this act connected them to the forces controlling their survival. The rain, the frost, the sun that could bless or destroy an entire year's harvest. Puma Punku may not have been a monument to power at all. It may have been a monument to fear, or to gratitude, or to both, built by people trying to make peace with a universe they could feel, but never fully control. And then, without warning, it all stopped. Sometime around 1000 AD, give or take a century, Tiwanaku's power began to collapse. For years, the reasons were unclear, but ice core samples pulled from nearby glaciers, along with sediment records from Lake Titicaca itself, eventually revealed the answer. A severe, sustained drought had settled over the region. For a civilization whose entire survival depended on precisely engineered water systems, that wasn't an inconvenience. It was a death sentence. Crop failures, food shortages, the kind of slow, grinding pressure that doesn't destroy a society in a single dramatic moment, but instead pulls it apart from the inside, year after year, until there's nothing left holding it together. By the time Spanish explorers finally arrived centuries later, Tiwanaku and Puma Punku were already ruins, silent, nameless, reduced to legend. But here's the part that turns this from tragedy into something even more haunting. Some of the destruction wasn't caused by earthquakes or the slow erosion of time. It was caused by us. Colonial records describe stones being deliberately pulled from Puma Punku and hauled away, repurposed to build churches, bridges, even sections of a nearby railway line during the 19th and 20th centuries. The very evidence that might have finally answered how these blocks were shaped and assembled was, in some cases, quite literally dismantled and scattered across other buildings entirely. A loss archaeologists still mourn today. So when you look at the shattered field of stone that remains, you're not looking at the full story. You're looking at a fragment of it. A crime scene, in a sense, where some of the evidence was removed long before investigators ever arrived. But the story isn't finished, because the ground itself is still talking. Using ground-penetrating radar and LiDAR scanning technology, archaeologists have detected buried structures beneath the surface at Tiwanaku. Structures that suggest the full complex may be significantly larger than anything currently visible above ground. Entire sections of this ceremonial city may still be sitting undiscovered, buried under centuries of sediment and farmland. Every new scan raises a new question. Every excavation season adds another fragment to a puzzle that, after 500 years, still isn't complete. And maybe that's the real takeaway here. Not a tidy conclusion, but an honest one. We know more about Puma Punku today than we ever have. We understand the quarries. We understand plausible methods of transport. We understand the kind of labor systems capable of moving stone across kilometers of unforgiving terrain. We even understand, in broad terms, the tools capable of shaping andesite by hand. What we still don't fully understand is how certain surfaces achieved such extreme flatness. How measurements stayed so consistent across separate, individually carved blocks. What exact combination of technique, time, and inherited skill turned raw volcanic rock into something that, to modernize, looks almost machined? Maybe that's uncomfortable. We like our mysteries solved. We like clean answers. But perhaps the discomfort itself is the lesson. It's tempting to look at Puma Punku and reach for something extraordinary to explain it, because the ordinary explanation, patient human hands, generations of inherited skill, unimaginable persistence, feels somehow too small to account for what's standing in front of you. History keeps proving otherwise. Giza, Stonehenge, Angkor. Puma Punku belongs on that list, not because it breaks the rules of what ancient people were capable of, but because it exposes how badly we still underestimate them. The wind still moves across that Bolivian plateau exactly the way it did 1,500 years ago. Tourists walk between broken blocks of andesite, running their fingers along grooves carved by hands that vanished from written history long before anyone thought to record their names. And not far away, Aymara communities, descendants of the people who may have built this place, still hold Tiwanaku as sacred ground. A living thread stretching from a past we're still trying to reconstruct into a present that hasn't forgotten it. We may never learn the names of the engineers who designed Puma Punku's interlocking stone. We may never fully reconstruct exactly how they achieved its most extreme tolerances, but we know this much for certain. They solved problems that would intimidate a modern engineer, even one armed with steel tools, hydraulics, and centuries of accumulated knowledge. They did it at brutal altitude, in a climate designed to break the unprepared, using nothing but stone, sand, rope, and a mastery of geometry precise enough to still confuse specialists 1,000 years later. Their civilization didn't fall to an invading army. It was worn down by a sky that stopped delivering rain. Their monuments were later torn apart piece by piece and repurposed into buildings that had nothing to do with the world that built them. And still, enough remains, scattered across that wind-swept plain, to keep asking the same question that first stopped Spanish explorers in their tracks 5 centuries ago. How did they do this? Maybe that question doesn't need aliens to stay fascinating. Maybe the real mystery, the one actually worth sitting with, isn't about who helped ancient people build something impossible. It's about how much we still underestimate what they were capable of building entirely on their own. The stones of Puma Punku don't need an extraordinary explanation to remain extraordinary. They only need us to keep asking, honestly and carefully, what we still don't know.